begin our broadcast in the world of politics for the year. And on January 17th, President Johnson delivered his State of the Union address, promising many very important things to the people of our country. Next, a few weeks later, Richard Nixon, Republican from California, announced his presidential candidacy nomination that he would take a shot at the seat at the highest power in the land. A few weeks later, brother of former President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert Kennedy, announces that he will also run for president, ending a very, very, very long debate. Also, a few weeks after that, President Johnson delivers his address to the nation announcing steps to limit the war in Vietnam and also his decision not to seek re-election. This speech announces the first in a series of limitations on U.S. bombing, promising to halt these activities, which is above the 20th parallel. And more on the war in Vietnam, the U.S. and the North Vietnamese delegations agreed to peace talks in Paris that begin formally on May 10th of that year. On the night of the California primary election, Robert Kennedy, brother of John F. Kennedy, addresses a very large crowd of people in San Francisco, where at approximately 12:13 a.m. as he leaves the stage, he is shot by Sirhan Sirhan, motive for this being the pro-Israeli speeches that Kennedy made during his campaign. He died later that morning. In Miami Beach, nominee Richard Nixon is nominated as official Republican presidential candidate. He appoints Spiro Agnew of Maryland as his running mate and is challenged in his campaign by Nelson Rockefeller and Ronald Reagan for that spot as Republican nominee. And on Election Day, November 4th, the results come in overwhelmingly for Richard Nixon, 43.4% of the vote, as a matter of fact, which earns him spot as next president. But we all know where that one goes. Next in our broadcast, we talk about the culture of 1968, beginning with the beginning of the Big Mac, the world-famous Big Mac, which cost 49 cents, served in a McDonald's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I must say, I was loving it. Next, we talk about Elvis's comeback special, which aired December 3rd and is one of the greatest rock and roll moments ever. The King of Rock, who had been grinding out very forgettable movies for 7 years prior to that, made his special comeback, rocking killer leather on stage, playing with some of his sidemen like guitarist Scotty Moore. The Mexico Summer Olympics were this year, and this is the very famous moment where medalists Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their fists in protest for black rights. Very unforgettable moments in the fight for racial equality, we must say. And it was a very successful year for the United States, who came out with the most medals. Go USA. Beatles released Hey Jude this year, and this ended up being the top song in the charts in the United States of America. Beatles were on the fall, but they had one more last hurrah before they really broke up.
Go.
Now we go into the world of cinema for the year. The top 3 grossing films in the United States in this year were 2001: A Space Odyssey, Funny Girl, and rounding out the top 3 we have The Love Bug. The top songs for this year were, as previously mentioned, Hey Jude by the Beatles, What a Wonderful World, as we all know and love, by the great Louis Armstrong, Sitting on the Dock of the Bay by Otis Redding, Jumpin' Jack Flash by the Rolling Stones, and to finish off the top 5, we have the Beatles once again with Lady Madonna. And TV shows that premiered this year were 60 Minutes on CBS, which is famously still run today, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and Hawaii 5-0. And sports for the year, beginning on January 1st, the Rose Bowl, which the USC Trojans came up on top 14-3 against the Indiana Hoosiers to win the College Football National Championship. Moving on to January 14th, the Super Bowl II, which saw the great old Green Bay Packers defeating the Oakland Raiders 33-14. And head coach Vince Lombardi announced his retirement later on that year. Very sad moment for diehard Packers fans. And also in NFL news, the Cincinnati Bengals were formed. Rawr. In more college football news, O.J. Simpson, running back for the USC Trojans, handily wins the Heisman Trophy with a score of 2,853 points in the voting race. Also, in the World Series, the Detroit Tigers won in 7 games, 4-3 over the St. Louis Cardinals, MVP being Mickey Lolick of the Detroit Tigers. In the men's national championship for basketball, the UNC Tar Heels played the UCLA Bruins. Tar Heels unfortunately came up short this year, 78-55, with Coach John Wooden at the helm for the Bruins. In NBA news, the Boston Celtics won 4-2 over the Los Angeles Lakers. A very, very, very pivotal matchup between two of the league's top franchises. And in Triple Crown race news, we almost had another Triple Crown winner this year with Forward Pass winning the first 2 races, the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness, only to be defeated by Stage Door Johnny in the Belmont Stakes. Very tragic moment for horse-loving fans. And in hockey news, the Montreal Canadiens, who aren't even part of this country, whatever, win 4-0, sweeping the St. Louis Blues. Continuing our broadcast today, we talk about society in the United States of America in the year 1968, beginning with the famous March on Memphis with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which famously turned very violent. And after King himself fled from Memphis, a 16-year-old boy was killed, 60 people injured, and over 150 people were arrested in the protests. Also, later that month, in Memphis once again, Dr. King spent the day at the Lorraine Motel, working with local leaders on his plans for the Poor People's March on Washington. At 6 p.m., as he greeted some friends in the courtyard, he was shot by James Earl Ray and was pronounced dead later that day. The assassination sparked rioting all throughout the country in major cities such as Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, Detroit, Kansas City, and Washington, D.C. Also, this year, as the space race continued, Apollo 7 is launched from Florida for an 11-day journey which orbits the Earth 163 times. And also, at the same year, the launch of Apollo 8 began, and the first U.S. mission to orbit the moon was now underway. And in 1968, we said goodbye to many famous people, including the famous blind deaf Helen Keller. Very tragic, tragic death for many who she inspired around the world. And as we wrap up our broadcast today, we talk about the economics of these times, starting with the unemployment rate, which was at 3.3% in 1968, the lowest it had been in the last 15 years. Gas per gallon was 34 cents. Very, very nice. If only it could be like that low these days, honestly. The inflation rate in the United States was 4.27%. The average cost of a new house was $14,950. And the average income per year was a mere $7,850. And the minimum wage for workers was $1.60 per hour. This is Chaz McFinkle with your 1968 newscast, and my trusty cameraman, Evie. Everyone have a great day. Today we talk about the economics of 1968. The unemployment rate was at 3.3%. Continuing our broadcast today, we talk about society in the United States of America in 1968. So let's talk about first.
I'm right here.
Let's talk society 1968.
Go.